Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to see so many friendly faces here. I know most of you, but I'm Ann Corso. I'm the Executive Director and CEO here at the Michener Art Museum. And I am so delighted and proud to introduce our speaker, who hardly needs an introduction. As I'm sure almost all of you know, Bruce Katsiff is so legendary in our community, has done such incredible things for the Bucks County arts community, for the Michener Art Museum, where he served as many years as a visionary director, at Bucks County Community College, where he started as a young photography professor and built a department and really a state-of-the-art art facility. But today we are celebrating and acknowledging Bruce in his other life, that of an artist, of a photographer, and someone who is so well-versed in the medium. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Bruce Katsiff, who will talk not only about his own work, but the history of photography and why this medium inspires him so much. So thank you, Bruce.
So I'm delighted to be here, and thank you all for coming out on such a pretty day to come inside for a lecture. I should comment that Anne has done just wonderful work in the 2 years that she's been here. It's great that the museum has really stable, solid leadership, and we look forward to all kinds of wonderful activities in the coming years. Today, I'm actually not going to speak much about my own work. I'm really going to talk almost entirely about the history of photography before the digital revolution, okay? There have been some really profound changes that have been occurring in the last decade with photography, and what's moving forward with AI is going to be even more profound than any of the changes that we've seen up till now. But the one thing that you might give some thought to and might help you to understand it is that in today's world, 99.9% of the photographs that are made with one of these toys, okay? They're great toys, they're great toys. 50 years ago, how was a photograph made? It was printed as a physical object, printed on paper. Could you get it any other way? Probably not. So we've seen there's just this incredible change in the way we use photography and see it, and it's been converted from the analog world to the digital world. So one of the great things also about photography is it's a young medium, and we can go back to its very beginning and know the individuals who really did the original research and how it all got started. And that's really the thrust of my talk this afternoon. And when we talk about the history of photography, one of the interesting parts is to realize that the camera comes first, okay? That there were cameras before there was film. Cameras actually go back to the Renaissance, and the tool was the camera obscura. And here we have a camera obscura of 1740. And what do we have? We have a lens in the front, which is a piece of polished glass, curved glass. And what that lens does is it bends light. And that lens projects an image onto the mirror that you see there. The mirror is section M. And the reason for the mirror is that when a lens projects an image, it's upside down and backwards. And in fact, that's the way our eye projects an image on our retina. the image that is projected on our retina is the scene upside down and backwards. And in order to avoid that, they put a mirror in the camera obscura. And then finally, we have an artist on top with a piece of tracing paper, and they could trace out the image, and that's what a camera was used for. And we know, for example, some artists were renowned because of their use of the camera obscura. One of the best examples is Vermeer. I mean, Vermeer was addicted to the camera obscura, and much of his work really could not have been done without the camera obscura. But despite the fact that the camera obscura is there, what people were striving for was, how can we capture that image from the camera obscura without the use of the hand? Is it possible for us in some way to record the image of the camera obscura? That search starts to become very active in the 18th century. And we're going to take a look first at one of the early inventors, and this is Joseph Niepce. He is the kind of typical scientist of the day, wealthy man who does experiments on his own, who's done some investigation. He begins to, actually the story is that he, for his wedding, goes somewhere and brings a camera obscura along, and he's not happy with the results. He's not a very good artist. So he becomes obsessed with his idea. Well, how can I capture the image from the camera obscura and capture it without my hand, have the light draw the picture? So here's a photograph of Niepce from about 1820. And he actually succeeds in producing what most of us accept as the first photograph ever made in 1827, view from the window at La Grasse. And there it is. The only trouble is we don't know what it is. So the process that he used was very unusual and peculiar. It had to do with bitumen, and the exposure was about 24 hours long that it was in the image, and it's not actually a very successful answer, but it is pretty much accepted as the first photograph that was ever made. Niepce, however, goes into a partnership with another gentleman, and this is Louis Mandin Daguerre. This is a French entrepreneur. Daguerre is the operator of something called the diorama. The diorama is the multimedia show of the 1740s. Huge scene that would be painted scene, and the audience would come in, and the scene would shift from day to night as he changed the lighting. In fact, I'll show you, there's an image of Daguerre, and next, there's a sample of Daguerre's diorama. The diorama actually came to America, and there were programs where you could go see the diorama here in America. Niepce gets together with Daguerre, and they form a partnership. And the two of them share information, and they're both working towards the same goal for different reasons. Daguerre's interest is, if he can produce these photographs, he'll save money in making his dioramas. So he's motivated financially to come up with a solution. Niepce dies, but Daguerre keeps working. And Daguerre makes a remarkable discovery. At the time, people were aware of the fact that silver salts were light sensitive. And what Daguerre does is he takes a piece of copper. The copper gets coated with silver, so it's got silver plating on it. He then exposes it to iodine fumes, and that produces silver iodide, which is a light-sensitive material. So Daguerre finds out that he can do all that, and that he can have the action of light change things. But then this magic thing happens. He has one of his plates in a medicine cabinet, and he goes in and looks at it, and it's turned black. And he doesn't understand what's happened. And he checks out all the chemicals that are in his cabinet, and he doesn't have the answer. And then he finds there's some mercury from a broken thermometer in the cabinet. And he realizes it's the mercury that has done it. And the way that the daguerreotype was done was that it was a copper plate coated with silver, originally exposed to iodine, and then developed up in mercury vapor. The life expectancy of early daguerreotypists was very short because they would be inhaling mercury vapor, because one of their tools was a heated bath of mercury. And here we have Daguerre's, one of Daguerre's first photographs. This is of a busy street, excuse me, in Paris. And there's something really interesting. If you look over there, you see a faint image, because this photograph was taken during the day. The street was busy. How come we don't see any of the people? The exposure was 2 hours long, so the people were walking, but somebody stopped to have their shoes shined. So if you look carefully, you can see the shoe shiner there, because they stopped for half an hour. A faint image of them is recorded. So this was remarkable magic, remarkable magic. So Daguerre basically says, I've got a system, I can reproduce, I can create the image from the camera obscura and save it on my daguerreotype plates. Another then really remarkable thing happens. Daguerre meets with the head of the French Academy of Science, a gentleman by the name of Arago. They're convinced that this is really a very important discovery. And what they do is they give Daguerre a lifetime stipend, and also give Niepce's heirs a stipend in exchange for them making the process free and open to the public, so that everyone would have an opportunity to make use of it. And the king basically had to agree to this deal. So all of that happens. And here, in fact, we have one of Daguerre's, this is one of Daguerre's cameras. And the daguerreotype then is born. We're going to get to this, we'll get to this slide in a second about Philadelphia. And there's a joint meeting of the French Academy of Arts and Sciences in January of 1839, and this major announcement is announced about how, with the action of light, they can record the image from the camera obscura. Newspapers from around the world gather. It's a public announcement. And there's a reporter from the London Globe who's there, who writes a story about it, a detailed story that talks about exactly what the process is and what he had done and all of that stuff. A copy of that London Globe winds up on a ship that leaves London and comes to America, okay? It comes to America, it comes to Philadelphia, and a gentleman who works at the Mint in Philadelphia reads that article and says, I'm going to try and make a daguerreotype. This looks interesting. So he builds a small camera, and he gets a copper plate. He's knowledgeable about mechanics. He works at the Mint with a lot of equipment, and he goes out and he puts his camera obscura in Philadelphia on Chestnut Street, where Central High School was at the time. And he does the first photograph made in America in September of 1839, just 8 months after Daguerre's announcement, and as a result of, again, a newspaper article that he read. This photograph, incidentally, is in the collection of the Pennsylvania Historical Society. So it's still here in Philadelphia, but it really is the first photograph ever made in the city. As I said, these details about the history of photography, it's really quite unique. Imagine if we knew about the history of painting, or who first got pigment, or who, in the case of photography, we have remarkable knowledge. I might add that much of this knowledge was done as a result of the research by a remarkable scholar of photo history whose name was Beaumont Newhall. He's no longer with us. He was the director of the Eastman House in Rochester, and he really did a lot of the original research, and it was done as a result. He worked at the Museum of Modern Art. He was a librarian at the Museum of Modern Art. Alfred Barr, who is the director of the museum, wanted to do an exhibition celebrating the 100th anniversary of the invention of photography in 1939. And he went to Beaumont Newhall and he said, "I'd like you to do the research on this." So Newhall was the one who discovered the writings, the collaboration between Niepce and Daguerre. And I will tell you, when I was a student at RIT in Rochester, I had a photo history course, and the teacher was Beaumont Newhall. He wasn't like my average professor. So in the collection of the Pennsylvania Historical Society. And the first selfie, selfies are nothing new. The first selfie was also done in Philadelphia by Robert Cornelius, again in 1839, because one of the things that happens is that because there's no patent on the daguerreotype process, it's free and open, the process spreads like wildfire because anybody can take it up. And here we have that first selfie done in America in 1839. Again, at the time, the exposures are long and the process is it's moving along. What then happens is that the daguerreotype explodes. I mean, it's just done for millions. Think about this. In the 1850s, who had a picture of themselves? The wealthy. Somebody who could afford to hire an artist to paint a painting of themselves or of their kids or of something they cared about. And all of a sudden, the common man has the ability to have an image of themselves, which had never happened before. Portraits by the millions. And lots of entrepreneurs would get the equipment and they'd go out and they were traveling daguerreotypists who were doing daguerreotypes by the millions. And here we have a Daguerrean studio, from the 1840s. So the first thing is, if you're going to have your daguerreotype taken, if it's a cloudy day, you don't go to the daguerreotypist because they can't do it on a cloudy day. They don't have enough light. The other thing is that the Daguerrean studios were always on the top floor because they needed skylights. They had no artificial light. A candle wasn't enough. You needed some bright sunlight. And if you look very carefully, you'll notice that there's a clamp that helps to hold the head steady as you sit for the daguerreotype, okay? Because the exposures were relatively long. The exposures were maybe 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 6 seconds. The exposures were shortened as scientists suggested other materials other than iodine to make the silver light sensitive. For example, the use of bromine, so that you got silver bromide, which was a much more light-sensitive material. This is an example of a kind of finished daguerreotype. And you've all seen them, I'm sure. This is what a daguerreotype looks like. It comes in a case like this. And, they came in different sizes. There were full plates, half plates, quarter plates. The cost would change depending upon what size you wanted. And daguerreotypes, when you look at them, it's almost like looking at a mirror. You have to hold it just right, because it's the difference between the polished surface and the unpolished surface. The other thing that's unique about the daguerreotype is it's a one-of-a-kind original. You only get one, and you can't, the only way you could make another one was to take a daguerreotype of a daguerreotype, okay? Because there is no negative, and we'll get to that in a second. But let's take a look at some of these early daguerreotypes. Augustine Washington. You may notice, if you look very carefully in some of these, you'll see there's some color. And where did that come from? Hand tinting, okay? They would go in and they would tint the daguerreotypes to add some color to them. And then some enterprising daguerreotypists said, you know, we do mortuary daguerreotypes. So if you want a record of your dearly departed, the daguerreotypist will oblige you. And this is a mortuary daguerreotype. There were also daguerreotypes that were called occupationals, where somebody would come with their tools and you do an occupational daguerreotype. And there were also some erotic daguerreotypes. In this case, it's a stereoptic daguerreotype. So you'd use a stereoptic viewer and see the image in 3D, but it's a daguerreotype. Again, remember, a one-of-a-kind original. They even did a daguerreotype of the moon, you know, a daguerreotype with the use of a telescope. And one of the ones that I'm always amazed by, Whipple and William Bond, they're responsible for the moon, but John Adams Whipple does this daguerreotype, which is pretty amazing. This is a fire in Buffalo, I believe. Okay, all of that's fine and dandy, but while Daguerre is doing all this stuff in France, there's somebody else doing stuff in England. And that's going to be this character, William Henry Fox Talbot, an English nobleman, also, quote unquote, an amateur scientist. And Talbot is experimenting with trying to save the image of from the camera obscura. But Talbot begins working with a piece of paper that he then coats with silver iodine, and he's able to make it light sensitive. The only problem is when he puts it in the camera obscura, what happens is that everything that's bright, that's light in the photograph doesn't appear in his, or light in the image doesn't appear in his photograph. And things that are dark in the image appear very light. It's basically reversing things, because what happens is that the light turns the paper black, okay? The stronger the light, the darker the paper. He's producing negatives. It's a negative image. Here is Fox Talbot. Talbot then, actually before Daguerre, makes an image that really would have been the first photograph, but Daguerre went public before Talbot knew about it, because Talbot actually had done, here we go, 1835, 4 years before Daguerre's announcement, Talbot does this photograph of the latticed window, and he talks about the fact that, you know, you could count how many windows there were in the latticed window. He had these little cameras that his wife called mousetrap cameras, these little cameras, and he'd put a piece of writing paper that he had sensitized, put that piece of writing paper in the camera, and he would get a negative. When Daguerre makes his announcement, And it goes public. Talbot says, you know, gee whiz, I made this discovery 5 years ago, and yet here is Daguerre getting all the credit for it. Actually, there's one of his mousetrap cameras. And one of Talbot's first uses, when he gets this light-sensitive material, is to do what today we call photograms. He would place an object on the piece of light-sensitized paper and put it out in the sun, you know, and it would block the light, and he'd get an image that he called a photogenic calotype. He called this photogenic drawing. Today we'd call it a photogram. But Talbot also suddenly realizes at some point that the solution to his problem is, once he's got this negative that he's produced, take another piece of paper, sensitize it to be light sensitive, place the negative on top, and put it out in the sun, and it'll reverse the tones back. So he'll suddenly have a positive. So Talbot basically invents the negative-positive process, which is the process that photography uses up until the digital era. Okay? I mean, today a lot of the people under 30 maybe have never seen a negative. They don't know what a negative is. Those of us who are over 50 are probably pretty familiar with negatives. And in fact, Talbot had this reading room where he would have a bank of pictures out in the sun being converted. So the really important change is you could make hundreds of photographs from one negative with Talbot's process. With Daguerre's process, it was a one-of-a-kind original. So suddenly, photography is a reproducible medium that allows you to make multiples, basically almost limitless number of multiples. The other thing that Talbot does is he produces the first book of photographs titled The Pencil of Nature. So he produces a book where he hand tips the photographs. They're glued into the book. One of the problems that Talbot had, though, was he sensitizes this piece of paper, puts it in a camera obscura, gets an image, but then when he takes it out to look at it, the longer he looks at it, the rest of it keeps turning dark until eventually there's nothing left. It goes black because all the light-sensitive material is still in the paper. So you've got a photograph, but you got to look at it in really dark light and put it away quickly, because if you leave it out, it's going to disappear. So that was a real problem, but fortunately, Jonathan Herschel, the scientist, had a solution for them. He said, you know, sodium thiosulfate is a solvent for silver salts. After you take your picture out of the camera obscura, if you bathe the paper in sodium thiosulfate, it will dissolve away the silver salts, but it won't touch the metallic silver. And of course, it was called Fixer. And photographers have all known about Fixer because that's the last, not necessarily the last, but it's the third chemical that you put in order to stop the action of the light. So let's take a look at the work of some of these early photographers. And we're going to start with Nader, who was a remarkable photographer who did just really quite astounding imagery. This is Sarah Bernhardt. This is a French mime. In fact, Daguerre even put his camera up in the air. Okay, so in a hot air balloon, Daguerre would be up there, and this is a satirical drawing about Daguerre flying high with his camera, taking pictures of Paris. And there you go. So these are aerial photographs from, 1850. So the other thing that happens, and again, think about this today. If I say to you, pyramids at Egypt, all of us come up with a clear picture of what that is, right? Why is that? In large part, it's because we've seen photographs of that, okay? We've seen photographs of everywhere around the world. There was a time when people didn't see those photographs. If they were lucky, maybe there was a painting that they saw. So one of the things that happens with the early photographers, and we're going to look at the work of Maxime Deschamps. So the effort was, we're going to travel around the world, we're going to record this imagery, and we're going to make multiples of it. And in fact, when you went to these sites, there would, as there are today, there would be places where you could buy a Talbot-type or a calotype of the scene. This is at Abu Simbel. And, people were absolutely fascinated by this. It was really this desire for information, and information that was suddenly accessible to everybody as a result of the photograph. This is Francis Frith. Now, one of the things that was interesting about this is that eventually they started, instead of using a piece of paper, they would use a piece of glass to make the negative. The only problem was, it was a process called the wet plate process. And the only problem was that you had to coat the emulsion onto the glass, take the photograph, and develop the photograph before the emulsion dried. Because if the emulsion dried, it would crack. So if you were a photographer, not only did you have to travel with your camera, you had to travel with your darkroom too, okay? Because your camera was no good unless you had your darkroom alongside. And in fact, while I don't happen to have his pictures, if you think about Matthew Brady, the photographer known for all the photographs of the Civil War, Matthew Brady was doing wet plate photography. Matthew Brady had a wagon that was basically his darkroom so that he could sensitize the plates, or he may have had an assistant sensitizing the plate, and then go out, put it in the camera, take the picture, take it back into the darkroom, develop it up. So it was not easy. This is Francis Frith again in Egypt. The next picture is a really interesting one because it's all about the question of, is photography an art form? And this photograph by Rylander was one of the photographs that played an essential role in trying to answer that whole question. This is called the two paths of life, okay? And you can see on the right side is one path, on the left side is another path. This is a composite photograph that was made by using about 19 different negatives that he would place down and print. And it's a storytelling. It's a really directorial, and we'll talk about that a little bit. It's a directorial photograph. We'll talk about that distinction a little bit. But what was important was this picture was bought by Queen Victoria for her art collection. That was a significant change. If the Queen says it's art, then it surely must be art. Interestingly, when it was shown publicly, they would cover the half with the naked people on it, and you would only see the half with the dressed folks. Or this picture, another picture by Rylander. Again, a constructed image. Actually, or finally, another Rylander famous image called Fading Away. Okay, here it is, you know, the person is on their deathbed, the parents are there, you know, somber, and, you know, they're moving on to another world. One of the things that I believe in is that you can classify photographers into two different camps. There's one camp that I call directorial photographers. These are people who can create and control the photographs they make. They build the things they're going to photograph. Actually, I'm pretty much a directorial photographer. All of those still lifes that I did, I obviously found the objects, I bring the objects together, I go into my studio. I'm working really as a Renaissance painter might have worked who was a still life artist. That's one group, the directorial. But there's a second group that we would call the window to nature photographers. And those are photographers who are showing you something in the world that they've seen, a fleeting moment, or some magic building, or any number of things. And we're going to look at, as we're looking at some of these photographers from the 19th century and 20th century, we'll talk a little bit about it. Who do you think this is? It's Lewis Carroll. This is Alice in Wonderland. This is a photograph by Lewis Carroll. And I hate to do this next one, but because there's some questions about Lewis Carroll. This is also Lewis Carroll. So one of the interesting things about photography is that even in the 19th century, there were women photographers. And that's unusual, because if you think about the arts, women's place in the arts was very often secondary, okay? We can't identify too many women Renaissance painters, or it was even worse in sculpture. But for some reason in photography, it was not the case. And we're going to take a look at photographs by Julia Margaret Cameron, remarkable photographer. She was a wealthy English woman who took to this work of photography and would get her friends to pose for her. She would dress people in costumes. And she even hung photographs in the railroad station that was near her home because she had fond memories of picking up her children there. But Julia Margaret Cameron was a remarkable photographer. This is a photograph. This is actually Herschel, the English scientist. And then this next one is one of her most famous photographs. This is called The Kiss of Peace. Actually, the title of one of my photographs is really drawn in part from the photograph that I titled The Kiss of Sleep, is drawn in part from this title that Julia Margaret Cameron had. And then let's take a look at some of the photographers who are photographing the American West. And one of the best of them was William Henry Jackson, 1843. Well, you see it there. But here he is. You know, he's got his camera on a tripod. He's got a dark cloth. He's got a large plate, because there's no enlarger at this time. The photograph could only be the same size as your negative. Later on, there were enlargers that allowed you to make pictures bigger, even if your negative was small. So if you wanted a big picture, you had to have a big camera. So here he is, and you can imagine what the glass plates would weigh. If you're carrying 50 glass plates with you in your wagon, first of all, they're glass plates in a wagon, which isn't a good idea to begin with. But it was definitely a daunting challenge. And here, of course, we are the geyser, the famous geyser. And all of this effort to kind of record the wonders of the world and show it to people is something that photography is just dominated by in this period. The next thing we're going to take a quick look at is a remarkable change that happens. and that changes George Eastman. George Eastman is a banker in Rochester, New York. And he's an investor, he's an entrepreneur, and he begins to get interested in this idea that, you know, instead of putting the emotion on a piece of glass, you know, if we put it on, we put it on something that was transparent, but that could move, maybe we could have a roll of film in some way. So Eastman decides to form this company to create cameras, and he calls it Kodak. And he calls it Kodak intentionally because he wants a word that can be used in many different languages. And here he is with one of his cameras. And here we are, September 4th of 1888. He gets a patent for the Kodak camera. And the way the camera worked is you bought the camera and it was already loaded with film. And it would take 100 pictures. You could take 100 pictures, and when you were all done, you mailed the camera with the film still in it back to Rochester, back to Eastman Kodak, right? And they took the film out, they processed it, they made the prints, they put a new fresh roll of film in your camera, and they sent it all back to you. And that's how the camera worked. And of course, it was his advertising, and this is the classic advertising, you know, you press the button, we do the rest. This suddenly makes photography available to everyone, okay? So it's no longer the committed person who's got a wet plate and has got a darkroom with them, but suddenly photography is accessible to everybody. It becomes a universal tool, really through Kodak. Later on, we're going to see how Kodak missed the boat when it came to this conversion to the digital world. We'll talk about that in a bit. But here is the original Kodak camera. And here are some photographs from the Kodak camera. So if you're ever in an antique store and you see some pictures that are in little circles, odds are they were taken from a Kodak camera, because that's what they looked like. And again, this just completely changed it. It makes photography accessible to everyone. You needed no particular skill. If you could buy the Kodak camera, you could make pictures. I won't belabor this, but this is a detailed history of what happens in year after year in the history of photo. What I want to do now is take a look at some photographers that I think were important, and these are photographers pretty much in the 20th century that I'm going to jump to. And the one that we're going to start with is this guy, Louis Hine. Louis Hine is a social worker who suddenly gets an interest in photography, and he starts to make some pictures that have become classic. And when you see some of these pictures, I'm sure you will have seen them before, but you may not have known that they were done by Louis Hine. And one of the places that he photographed was Ellis Island. So this is a classic window to nature photographer, okay? Louis Hine is going to the site and he's showing you the scenes that he saw. He's not creating these things. He's not organizing these things. This is a classic window to nature photographer. I'm going to use my camera to show you the world, to show you what I've seen. And this classic image of the family arriving at Ellis Island, or this famous image, I'm just curious, how many people have seen this image before? Okay, some have seen it before. It's a classic image. Also, Louis Hine photographed child labor in America. And his photographs were important in getting the anti-child labor laws passed in America. In addition, the national parks were created in large part because photographs of those scenes were produced into a book which was given to every member of Congress. So photography played a part in the creation of national parks in America. this has been one of Louis Hines' photographs that I always loved. I mean, this whole business of the man in the machine, he's almost becomes a part of the machine as he crawls in there. And then this is perhaps one of Hines' most famous photographs. And again, this one, I think, many of you have seen. It's pretty remarkable. They're having lunch there as they're building the Empire State Building. Now we're going to take a look at maybe one of the most important 20th century art photographers, and that's Edward Weston. Edward Weston lived a charmed life, and he thought of himself really as an artist. And he was a purist. Here he is, doing this scene of the sand dunes. Edward Weston always did contact prints. He did 8x10, and he was also a platinum printer. We'll talk a little bit about that. And the next one is perhaps one of Weston's most famous photographs, a pepper. Can there be anything more lowly than a pepper? But what an exquisite pepper. I mean, it's really just a remarkable pepper. He spent a lot of time. In fact, one of the things that Weston did is he kept day books. So he would write every day in what he was doing. And in the case of this, he talks about the idea that he's become a cannibal, that he eats his subjects after he's finished photographing them. But I've always been astounded by that Louis Hine. And then let's jump. So in many ways, Weston is more directorial. This is clearly a directorial picture as opposed to it. But let's talk about then another 20th century woman photographer who was quite remarkable, and that is Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange worked for the WPA. You know that during the Depression, one of the things that was created was the Works Progress Administration, and one of the goals of the Works Progress Administration was to find work for artists. And there were thousands and thousands of artists who were employed during the Work Progress Administration. And one of the things they were charged with, it was run by a former editor for Look magazine, Roy Stryker, and they were charged with documenting conditions in America. And one of the people who has the most empathetic pictures that were ever made was Dorothea Lange, and there she is with her camera, which was a portable camera. It was a large one, but it didn't require a tripod. But here are some of Dorothea Lange's images. And of course, the next one is kind of a classic, but it's the Dust Bowl. So she's basically photographing the conditions during the Depression. It's interesting, there was actually another program called CETA, Comprehensive Employment Training Act, in the 1970s that was modeled after the WPA, which also hired lots of photographers and artists to work in the same way that the WPA. The post office mural here in Doylestown was a WPA project. Okay, there were a lot of WPA projects. There are schools in Philadelphia that were WPA projects. There were buildings built. If you're interested in that subject, the Delaware Art Museum currently has an exhibit up that looks at both the WPA imagery and imagery from the Comprehensive Employment Training Act, which a lot of people know nothing about that. But here again, this is Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange. And then next, arguably her most famous photograph, the migrant mother. And again, she's not setting this stuff up. These are people she's encountering. I had looked at this photograph for a long time before I realized that there was a baby in there too. That there are actually 3 children in the photograph, not 2. The one child at the bottom, which you can barely see. Interesting, this photograph is actually in the Delaware exhibition. It's on loan from the Museum of Modern Art. I don't know how Delaware got MoMA to lend it to them. One of the things about photographs is that, this is true about works on paper, they can't be held out in the light nonstop. The current rules say that you can only exhibit a photograph for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months out of the year. You got to let it rest the rest of the time. And you can only have 7-foot candles of illumination on photographs. So photographs, while they are more permanent, they're not really permanent. It's not like paintings, although paintings also can be light sensitive depending upon what medium. We're going to jump now to a photographer who was known as the decisive moment photographer. This is the guy who captured these fleeting instances that you saw in the corner of your eye, and his name is Henri Cartier-Bresson. And his work is really remarkable, and he's working with a small camera. He's actually working with a Leica, which was a small camera, which enabled the photographer to go around, and his Leica was black, so he could hide it, nobody would see it, and he would move very quickly so that he could do things like that. You know, just for an instant, this guy turned his head, and bang, you know, Bresson gets the photograph at that very precise moment. Or even more remarkable, how about that? I mean, you know, how long did he have to wait until a bicycle came down that path so that he could grab that photograph together with a curve of the steps? Or this photograph of the kid in Paris. He's really quite remarkable. Or how about this one? You know, I mean, a tenth of a second later, or a tenth of a second before, this photograph doesn't make sense. I mean, that foot is going to land on the ground in a second, and it's going to be a totally different picture. Bresson was also in the French Resistance. Actually, it's interesting because the curator at the Museum of Modern Art during the Second World War was Edward Steichen. And Steichen was aware of Bresson and was aware of his involvement with the French Resistance, and did an exhibit of Bresson's work at the Museum of Modern Art in 43 or 44. Here he is, you know, in a bombed out city, you know, getting a photograph of these kids playing. Can you imagine walking by and seeing that scene? And then isn't it wonderful how he frames it? I mean, how many people would have gotten rid of the broken stuff and would have moved in to get the picture of the kids? No, he's clever enough to step back and, you know, frame it. Or this picture, this is a Nazi collaborator. This is in Paris, when a woman who had been involved with the Nazis, the occupying forces, this is before her head was shaved, as she's being, you know, brought before the court, the local court that's going to decide her fate as people testify against her. Pretty powerful image. Or this image, Ladies of the Night in Paris. Okay, we're going to jump now to an advertising photographer. And actually, again, jumping back again, this will be more of a directorial photographer. And this is Richard Avedon. Richard Avedon, arguably one of the most important and best known advertising photographers. And we're going to start with Marian Anderson. I mean, talk about a spectacular image. And, you know, he's the one who has gotten the pose. He's set it up. Or this famous photograph, Marilyn Monroe. These are all Richard Avedon's work. And the next one is interesting because he was commissioned to do a portrait of the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR. But The photograph that he's known for is this one, which is before the photograph where they're all posing. They're all there, and he's caught this image. Or the next one, which is B-Man. For those of you who are purists, the marks that you see at the top edge and at the bottom edge are all about the fact that the film is loaded into a holder, and those holders leave spaces where no light will strike, so it's pure white. So the purist photographers, in order to show you that they didn't crop their photographs, include those marks in the picture. That was one of the things that Weston believed. Weston believed in something he called pre-visualization. And at the instant you took the photograph, that's the way it was supposed to be. You weren't allowed to crop it or change it afterwards. Another one, I've always wondered if he was aware, if he had seen Henri Cartier-Bresson's picture, and maybe got the idea in part from this. This is also Avedon. And another Avedon, and this was, commercial photographs. You saw Avedon's work in Vogue and, picture magazines galore. He was an advertising photographer. And then we're going to take a look at another photographer. And this is Bruce Davidson. Bruce Davidson was someone who was photographing people. Actually, my photographs, the Rivertown portrait pictures, really are drawn in large part from some of my experience with Bruce Davidson, who did this enormous body of work called East 100th Street. He photographed one street in Harlem, okay, and photographed almost everybody in that street and was focused on it. But the first photograph is not from that, but we'll see others from that. This is Bruce Davidson photographing at a circus. The next one actually is from the East 100th Street. And it almost becomes a crucifix, right? That child there, on the street, leaning back, the hands out. It's interesting because there was a lot of criticism about Avedon's work and about this East 100th Street, and probably best I not even get into it. This is Avedon again. And then he did a whole bunch of work out west. And then the final 21st century photographer, or 20th century photographer, that I always get that wrong, that I'm going to mention, is another woman, and that's Cindy Shermer. And she is, again, an absolute directorial photographer. She dresses herself in costumes and photographs herself. Okay, she creates the things that she's going to photograph. So here she is, right? These are large prints. And it's interesting, one of the things that Cindy Shermer has done that's been very clever is she's made sure that she's not in photo galleries, she's in art galleries. Because the price that you can get for work in an art gallery is a lot higher than the price you can get for work in a photo gallery. Here she is, taking off from a Renaissance painting and putting herself in the scene. Cindy Shermer again. And I believe this is Lois Lane. And another Cindy Shermer. So what's now happening is that obviously the life in photography is changing. One of the things that was true about photographs was that we believed that the photograph was true. until we were proven otherwise. We may have had some skepticism, but when we saw a photograph, we said, hey, that's a lens image, okay? A lens image, that's the way we see, right? Our eye has two lenses. It has a cornea and it has a lens. It's a 21 millimeter lens. It projects an image onto our retina, which is converted to electrical impulses, which are then read by our brain and interpreted, okay? But when we saw photographs, we said, you know what, it's a photograph. So photographs are generally true, right? Unless somebody's made it fake. In the AI world, that is reversed, okay? Photographs today, you know how photographers are making their photographs today? They talk to the computer. I want a picture of a bear with wings and chat produces the picture for them, okay? The picture is simply, it's pattern recognition. I actually, I should have put it in the slides, I didn't, but I don't do it a lot, but I played with it a little bit. And I basically produce a picture of myself shaking hands with Donald Trump in front of the White House, okay? And it took me 10 minutes. You know, I talked into chat and I said I wanted a picture. I said I want a picture shaking hands with Donald Trump. And then I said I want to be in a suit. And then I said I want to be in front of the White House. So the nature of what is a photograph is going to change profoundly. We will no longer trust photographs as truth. We will be skeptical. And people will say, well, it's a photograph. You know, you got to prove to me that that's real. And that hasn't changed. No, think about the way that the Iranians established the proof that they had shot down an American plane were those pictures, right, of the American plane that were shown on the news. Well, that was in the days when a photograph kind of represented truth, but it's not the case. So the changes that are happening in photography now are much more profound than anything else that's happened. So at any rate, I'm obviously crazy about the medium. You know, I first started getting serious about photography in high school, and I have spent the last 60 years making photographs. This talk is really not about the exhibition, but again, I said I define myself really as a directorial photographer. The exhibit, as I think you understand, includes kind of 5 bodies of work. I've worked in kind of 10, 12, 15-year cycles, so I'll take an idea and pursue it for a while, and then I'll switch to another one. One of the things that in many of my photographs are the platinum prints, and that deals with this whole issue of permanence. You know, one of the things that troubled the Royal Photographic Society in 1840 was the fact that photographs faded, and they couldn't be art because permanence is one of the qualities we expect of art. You know, art's supposed to be made of noble materials, it's supposed to be permanent, and it's supposed to raise or elevate our thinking about higher ideals, right? Well, if the photograph's going to fade, then it can't be art. So the Royal Photographic Society had a committee, and I love the name of this committee. It was called the Fading Committee, okay? And the Fading Committee was charged with the responsibility of, can we solve this problem that photographs fade? So they had a contest, and a gentleman by the name of William Willis suggested, you know, instead of using silver salts as the light-sensitive material, why don't you use platinum salts? Platinum is a more noble metal. It's a more stable metal. And he basically proposed the platinum process, which uses platinum salts. The photographs of mine from Natural Mort, where you see those brush strokes, those are all platinum prints, where you basically hand coat the paper. So you hand coat the paper and then expose it, and hopefully it represents a much more permanent process. So I'd be happy to take some questions, and I thank you for your attention. I'm afraid it's probably more about the history of photography than you care to know, but it is interesting that you can get to such detail about photo history and such an understanding for such it's a young medium indeed. happy to take any questions. Sure, go ahead.
Hold on. Annie Leibowitz's books.
Right?
I'm sorry. I was reading in one of Annie Leibowitz's books. She was looking at a photo that Ansel Adams took
Right.
of a distinctive cloud above a mountain. And she thought, how long did he sit there waiting for that to happen? And then she read, he manipulated the photograph in his developing. So he was doing that too.
Sure. I mean, obviously, photographers are making a selection. They're deciding where, and they're deciding how dark or how light they're making it. So there is clearly some manipulation. Although Annie Leibovitz, you know, her thinking about photography was really very important in the 20th century. Hey, folks, thanks so much. I appreciate your attention. Thank you.